Hey there, welcome to an exciting React journey where we'll solve a real-life riddle, the mysterious case of the untracked clicks. Not only will this boost your React skills, but it'll also prepare you for real job interview scenarios. This problem perfectly combines practical React knowledge and algorithmic thinking. So gear up as we unravel this mystery, and remember there will be challenging exercises along the way. Let's dive in. In a recent project, I came across a bug that was driving our analytics data haywire. The odd thing was that our tracking events would sometimes fire, but at other times, nothing. Especially once we started using more icon buttons. Let me explain very roughly how the tracking works. We'll go through this in more detail in a bit. Here's the text button and here the icon button. Both have a data tracking ID attribute. The buttons are wrapped with a tracking container which is connected to a use tracking hook. The use tracking hook attaches a click listener to the container. Now, when one of the buttons is clicked, the listener gets the tracking ID and sends it to our analytics tool. But as you saw, the tracking doesn't work as expected, so something must be wrong. Now comes the fun part, debugging. With Chrome DevTools as our ally, we can see that when we click the text button, the tracking ID is defined and the event fired correctly. But when we click the icon button, the tracking ID is undefined. Before we jump into the details of the code in the next part, let's pause for an exercise. Can you explain how the use tracking hook works? Take your time and try to think it through. To help you out, there's a link to a StackBlitz project in the video description. You can check that out and experiment a bit. This exercise will help you understand the upcoming content better. Alright, before we solve the riddle, let's understand how our use tracking hook works. We have a component where we pass a reference to the container element to the hook. Inside the hook, we add a click listener to this container. It's important to understand that this listener is not only called when we click on the container element itself. Because events in JavaScript bubble up, this listener is also called for any of its child elements. So when we click on one of the buttons, the click event eventually arrives at the container and triggers the listener. Inside the listener, we get the data tracking attribute from the event target and send the tracking event only if the tracking ID is set. Now here's the catch. When we click the text button, the event target is the button element, which has a tracking ID. But when we click on the icon inside the button, the event target is the SVG element, which doesn't have a tracking ID. This is where our riddle becomes intriguing. The question is, how do we get the tracking ID when clicking on the icon button? Alright folks, we've got another exercise for you. Now that we've walked through the problem, it's your turn to step up the plate. Can you come up with a solution? Believe it or not, this type of problem might just pop up in a job interview. It requires a bit of algorithmic thinking. So take a break, ponder a bit, and come back when you're ready with your own solution. Or if you're really stuck, to hear the solution I came up with. Now onto the solution. After a bit of thinking, I realized that we needed to recursively go through each parent element of the original event target until we hit an element with a data tracking ID attribute. First, we create a function named getTrackingID that accepts an HTML element as a parameter. What does this function do? It gets the tracking ID from the dataset of the element. The dataset is where we find our data tracking ID attribute on the element. But what happens if the tracking ID is not set? In that case, our function needs to call itself again, this time passing the parent element as a parameter. This is what makes our function recursive. It calls itself until it finds a tracking ID, or it runs out of parent elements to check. This brings up a little hiccup we face here. You see, TypeScript is throwing a bit of a fit because the parent element could be null. This happens when we've reached the root of the element tree, and there are no more parent elements to check. To handle this situation, we have to tell TypeScript that null is an acceptable value for our parameter type. If the element is not defined, our function will return null. Finally, we use our shiny new getTrackingID function in the event listener. This means that every time an event is triggered, the listener will use this recursive function to hunt down the tracking ID from the target element or any of its parent elements. And guess what? It worked. There's one downside to this recursive approach though. If we click on a child of a tracking container that we don't want to track, we go through all the parent elements even though we're not interested in this click event. This might impact performance in some apps, but for most apps this should be fine as there usually aren't thousands of parent elements. So, that was the solution to our first React riddle, but hold on, there's another bug lurking in the code. We'll be tackling that one in our next episode. Stay tuned and remember, keep your problem-solving hat on. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed our inaugural React riddle, and most importantly, I hope it got those problem-solving gears turning. If you have any thoughts or alternate solutions, do let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share and subscribe to stay updated with our future riddles. Until next time, happy debugging!